Incitement to insurrection to impeachment? Senator Gary Peters on the outrageous week on Capitol Hill and the leadership changes to come. And what does it all mean for the future of the Republican Party? Today is Sunday, January 10th, 2021, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint, and this was one of those times when the title of our program couldn't be more appropriate. We arrived at quite a flashpoint on Wednesday. In one sense, it was not particularly surprising. The president had signaled for months that he wasn't going to accept the results of the election if he lost. You know, the real landslide of this election was in the courts. Dozens and dozens of legal challenges were turned aside, and yet no amount of explaining or fact-checking seemed to be enough for the president and his legion of followers, who insisted that an entire nation of clerks, secretaries of state, canvassers, judges, and justices were either clueless or corrupt. When you think about it, we resort to combat and war terminology all the time. We have to fight for what we believe in. We're declaring war on something, or we're going to battle for our rights. Well, this week, the marauders at the Capitol took it all quite literally and to horrendous and seditious effect. Most Americans watch with a combination of horror and sadness, and yet I have one friend who told me we should rejoice in what happened because in the end, democracy won. The Republic is safe and sound and clearly quite resilient. As he put it, in the end, all of the Whos were left singing while the Grinches realized that they couldn't steal Christmas. And yet we must deal with a great tide of residue. Should the president be removed from office, or is that a waste of time and energy 10 days from Joe Biden's inauguration? What of the speculation that the president will try to pardon himself? And consider the moment for the two parties, one that now finds itself in charge in the White House and both chambers on Capitol Hill, and one that is now sent into a kind of disarray. It's all this morning on Flashpoint. Perhaps a little lost in the events of Wednesday were the events of Tuesday night, which actually helped feed the frustration among the rioters. The flip of 2 Senate seats from red to blue in Georgia. That, of course, means Democrats now have the edge in both Capitol chambers, but it also means a massive shuffling of leadership on the various committees where so much work gets done on the Hill. And it means Michigan's Senator Gary Peters now becomes the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. Think about how many issues all of that entails at the moment, from the riots to the pandemic. It is good to have with us Senator Peters back with us on Flashpoint. So much, Senator, for you and I to talk about, but to start, let's just cut to the chase. As a member of Congress, you have a role to play in what happens now regarding the final 10 days of the Trump presidency. What do you think Congress should do about the president?
Well, there's no question the president is not fit for office. What we saw transpire this week is reprehensible. It was just a very dark day for our democracy. But as you said in the opening, we came back to work, made sure that we verified the votes of the electors across the country and certified those. So we will have a new president coming into office with Joe Biden on the 20th. But certainly, it was a horrible thing to see, and I think every person watching the television saw the attack on the citadel of democracy, our United States Capitol, as an attack on the country and an attack on them as well. Folks took it very, very personally. So we have to condemn this as aggressively as we possibly can. You know, I've supported a move that the vice president and the cabinet should invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president immediately. Clearly, he is unfit. I have no idea what he may do in these remaining days, but it is a danger. And it's not just folks who are legislators. We have conservative groups like the National Association of Manufacturers, a very conservative business group that said the 25th should be invoked. He should resign immediately. You have newspapers that are conservative editorial boards like the Wall Street Journal saying he needs to be out of office now. You have a former cabinet member and the former chief of staff, Kelly, who said if he was still the Secretary of Homeland Security, he would be pushing for the 25th Amendment to have him removed. It is important for us to realize that he must be held accountable for what happened. And you mentioned that this has been going on. It's been this buildup that we've seen, particularly after the election, when he continues to put out conspiracy theories and make false allegations with no basis of fact, just angering his base in the process. We've not seen a U.S. president do that in the past, and we have to make sure a U.S. president never does it again in the future. So there needs to be accountability. There's no question in my mind.
Well, with 10 days left, we expect articles of impeachment will be submitted in the House. I don't see any way you get to 2/3 of the Senate voting to convict. Is there any point in moving ahead with impeachment proceedings?
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize just how damaging this behavior is and how dangerous it is. And that's really the point for me. And I've said this right after the election, when you had not just Donald Trump, you had folks all up and down in the Republican Party all putting out this false information. Folks who lost their races said it was because of fraud. Other elected officials said you raised all these kind of questions despite there not being any evidence. And as I said right from the beginning, I don't think folks realize how dangerous this is. When you start chipping away at the foundation of our democracy, which is that we have fair and free elections, then you start going down an incredibly dangerous path that will undermine the very fabric of this democratic republic that we have here. This is unacceptable. I think one of the things that would be great is if we had Republican officials come around and say, okay, yes, this was a fair election. Joe Biden won the election fairly. There was not fraud. Just tell the truth. If Republicans would start telling the truth, we will be on the path to healing, but they need to start telling the truth.
The reality that you're left with, though, is you have up to half of the nation that still feels very aggrieved. These are Americans who are a part of your America. And now, as you're a leading Democrat in charge of so much, given your committee responsibilities, what do you do now to try to get that America back together with the other half?
Well, I think there's two things. One is what I just mentioned, is that one reason why people feel aggrieved and are questioning what happened is because they're hearing that directly from a president, even though there's no evidence whatsoever, and they're hearing it from their local members of Congress, people they voted for. They have to stop. The Republican Party, if it wants to continue to be a legitimate party in this country, has to focus on facts and facts that we can agree on, which is based on the truth of what actually happened. But the other way is that then after we get through this, we have to come together. And I hope that this moment, this horrible moment that we just went through, will be a rallying cry for folks to come together as Americans first and as Michiganders first and understand that we have to solve tough problems. Let's not forget that we're in the middle of a pandemic that continues to impact people's health in a dramatic way. It impacts our economy. We need to be focused on getting through this pandemic. That should be the only thing we're focused on right now. And we have to come together as a country in order to do that. And it's incumbent on us, those of us who are privileged and blessed to be able to serve the people of Michigan or the country and the Congress, to show the kind of leadership necessary to find that common ground and solve the real problems that families are facing each and every day.
Well, let's move to those problems, many of which will be at the top of the list on your committee. I guess if you're a Democrat, the good news is you won control of the Senate. The bad news is you won control of the Senate, which now means you control all three levers in Washington: White House, House, and Senate. And the responsibility falls directly on you now for a lot of massive problems, starting with the pandemic. We've watched the vaccine rollout a little clunky, especially here. A lot of people complaining about how it's going here in Michigan so far. What is job one for you now to move forward in trying to defeat the coronavirus?
Well, certainly the rollout of the vaccine is absolutely critical. And I think this goes back, what we've seen with the rollout of the vaccine is the lack of a coordinated federal response to really step up and say that it's the federal government that can work with all 50 states. We have a president says, each state, you're on your own. There isn't going to be coordination. It's difficult to plan when you are all doing your separate thing. There needs to be a coordinated national response. It should have been that way right from the beginning of this pandemic, something that I was pounding the table on right from the beginning, part of what I oversee in the Department of Homeland Security. I was the ranking member before. I wasn't in charge, but we oversee FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management folks that had those responsibilities. They never treated this as the national emergency that it was and is. We have to do that with this vaccine development. I'm confident that you're going to see President Biden do that. He understands that. He's put out a very ambitious agenda to marshal federal resources to work cooperatively in close contact with state governments, but ultimately know that when you're dealing with a national emergency, it requires a national response and a strong federal response. And getting more of the vaccine in people's arms as quickly as possible is absolutely critical to getting us through this crisis.
Another massive problem that we have right now has been pushed to the back burners here a little bit, and that's this issue of cybersecurity and this massive hack that we've watched that appears to be at the hands of the Russians. How do we move forward? How do we act? What kind of action should we be taking against the Russian actors or Chinese actors? Lots of international mayhem, no doubt, that wants to be visited on us, but what do we do to get our house in order?
We must, again, be more coordinated in fighting the cyber attacks that we're seeing from state actors as well as criminal actors that are constantly engaged in cyber activities. And I've often said probably our number one national security threat is cyber. We have to strengthen our defenses. And it's going to take a couple things. One, we've got to be more coordinated. We have right now, and this has been a source of frustration for me, we have federal agencies that aren't working together. They don't cooperate to the extent that they should. They need to share information. Even after this massive attack, cyber attack on the federal government, it was difficult to know exactly where the attack was, what agencies were impacted. It showed that they were not working together. And this is going to take a whole of government approach. And government's going to have to work with private industry as well. Private industry was also hit as a result of the cyber attack. And oftentimes these bad actors go through the path of least resistance. They look at the weakest link, and some of those are smaller businesses, mid-sized businesses. We have to think comprehensively about that and harden our defenses. But it takes more than just hardening your defenses. Just think of your home. You want to make sure that you prevent a burglar from getting into your house, and you can put an alarm system and locks on your door. But you also have to let that burglar know if you get into the house, you will be caught and you will be punished, and there will be consequences for it. There needs to be a deterrent factor. We do not have the sufficient deterrent factor to let countries, state actors, and others know if they engage in these kinds of behaviors against the United States, they will be caught and there will be repercussions. And we have to talk through and decide exactly what we need to do in those situations.
And speaking of attacks in the United States, and I'm sorry that I've only got about 30 seconds left before I got to get to a break here, but what should we do about domestic terrorism, which is kind of what we saw happen? Clearly, we need better security at the U.S. Capitol. What about beyond that?
It is much broader. The U.S. Capitol clearly needs to have, I'm launching an investigation to find out exactly what happened to make sure it never happens again. But we have a rise of domestic terrorism and the insidious ideology of white supremacy. We saw the domestic terrorism here in Michigan with the plot to kidnap our governor. Yep. This is something has to be focused on. The Trump administration has not focused on this the way they should. I will make it a priority. We're going to be holding hearings. We're going to do investigations. And I look forward to having a partner in President Biden to finally deal with domestic terrorism in a way that treats it with all of the seriousness that it deserves.
So sorry to interrupt, Senator. I got to get to a break. I so appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Stay safe. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Devin.
Senator Gary Peters on Flashpoint. More coming up. What's ahead for the GOP? It's next.